This is Food Safety First with your host, Ryan Ramdas.
Welcome to the Food Safety First podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Ramdas. In today's episode, we'll discuss foreign material control. Have you ever bitten into your favorite food and find something that shouldn't be there? Hopefully not. We as consumers have the blind expectation that the food we buy is free from contamination. But it does happen, and when it happens, it becomes a major news story. From the potential injury to a consumer, to costly recalls, to the damage of a company's reputation. These are all things that can be effectively managed through a proper foreign material control program. Globally, recalls on food products due to contaminants continue to rise. Today we'll discuss how this happens and what a manufacturer can do to minimize this risk. I'd like to welcome back Jeff Wilson of AIB International, the Vice President of Food Safety Services for Europe, Asia, and Africa. Welcome back, Jeff.
Hello, Ryan. Good to talk to you again. Thanks for having me.
So, foreign materials. What exactly is foreign materials when you hear that term?
Well, foreign materials can be many things. Typically, it's something that shouldn't be there. So that can be a wide range of materials depending on what finished product you're biting into. They can be extraneous materials. They can be maybe materials that are present within the food type. And an example of within the food type might be, say, peanut products, where we have stalks and shells and stones, and these are all sort of naturally occurring within the growth of the raw materials. So raw products do bring a number of different challenges to the food manufacturer, and then we have through other materials depending on the type of manufacturing. So as we think about food safety facilities, manufacturing facilities, what are they made up of? Well, they're made up of typically these days stainless steel. Some of the older facilities will still have maybe some other material that is even glass. We think about some of the products that are produced, and the packaging that they're produced into could be glass. So when we think about foreign materials, we have from the raw material, and then the materials that may be introduced accidentally during the manufacturing process. And then we have to think about foreign materials that may be added to the product deliberately. So when we think about foreign materials in the food industry, you really do have to step back and think about root cause and the source of the raw material, the manufacturing process, and also from a food safety and food defense point of view as well.
What are some of the root causes? What are some of the contaminations?
Well, if we think about raw material, it would be stones, bones, pits, stalks, and these are usually quite easily to remove with different types of foreign material extraction systems. But more typically, in a manufacturing facility, we would be looking at sort of metal piecings, metal shavings, oil, buildup of oil and grease that coming off chains and other drive systems, and these can accumulate through a facility, unfortunately find their way into finished product or work in progress. Also, the facility itself, the fabric of the facility. These days, we see a lot of materials that have been removed, and I mentioned glass before, but there is still a need for plexiglass or safety glass or plastic to be used around guarding systems, and also painting. We see still facilities struggling with flaking paint, old paint. Still, some old facilities still deal with wooden structures. Flour mills, for example, here in Europe, you will still see some flour mills that still have a considerable amount of wood within them. Even though clients try to move forward with safe design of their equipment, we still see the actual building itself creating challenges to the product flow and open product. And that's maybe something we can talk about a bit later as well, as open product zones and product areas, because these are also critical when we start to think about particular foreign body contamination.
Interesting. You mentioned the equipment design, structural design, also the manufacturing practices. But what about employees? Are employees a root cause as well?
Yeah, they can be. We spend a lot of time, not just AIB, but all sort of food safety organizations, in trying to train individuals in the food industry how to protect the food. And you'll see operators wearing protective equipment, and it's to protect the food. Even if we see gloves being worn, we'll see sometimes face masks these days, of course, but also hairnets and other uniforms and overalls and hats. So what's really important is that, yes, we are helping our people in the facilities to have a uniform and stay clean, but ultimately we are protecting the food and the raw materials from contamination. Other contamination could be very simple from jewelry, and again, very strict food safety policies that facilities have around restriction and removal of jewelry before anybody would be inside a food manufacturing facility. That's pretty typical, but it is also about training and education, making sure that people understand why it's important not to wear jewelry, how to wear their hairnet correctly, and also to make sure that they do this at all times.
Interesting. So now that we know what some of the sources are, what exactly can a plant do to prevent it?
Well, we can have first of all, a root cause analysis, and there are many critical control points that a facility would look at. Analysis of their raw material, who they're sourcing their raw material from would be priority, and this is an expectation when laying out any food safety program, that you know the source of your raw material, and then to have knowledge around what are the potential foreign objects that may naturally occur within that raw material. And I made a reference to nut products before, and that's quite typical. So we would expect that analysis to take place for all raw material types. Then to think about the packaging types. And so if you know you're going to package your finished product into glass jars, then again, understanding the condition of glass jars if they are delivered to your facility, storage of them, breakage procedures, what happens if you have a glass breakage, not only of if it's one of your packaging material, but also if you have glass within a facility. So even though I mentioned before that facilities trying to remove materials such as glass and ceramics, they still exist. So what's important is to also have breakage procedures to know if you have an accidental breakage, what did you do? Was the material that was broken cleaned away effectively and safely? And was there any risk to the food stream, the food product? And if so, to have then clear procedures on how to hold and recall that product if needed. That's further down the stream. So we would expect the raw material analysis to take place, and then also to think about the equipment. Now, again, in the ideal world, it would be wonderful to have every single piece of equipment hygienically designed, but that's not the case.
Right.
So what's really important is understanding the equipment that you have on site. What are the potential food safety issues around running that equipment? I mentioned oil, lubrication, and then also just from the fabric of that equipment. So is it a painted surface? Is it stainless steel? Is it something that is affected by steam, water? Are there areas that can corrode? So from an AIB International point of view, we're looking for that knowledge to be in place, and it's an expectation when clients look at the risks within their facility for foreign objects, that they've actually looked at every aspect of the facility, being the raw material, the packaging, the machinery, and also the fabric of the building as well.
What about in-process inspection systems? What are some of the inspection systems that are used?
Yeah, we see an array of inspection systems. Typically, metal detection is what we see throughout the industry. And these can be positioned, again, in various places on the line, depending on what the product is. We do see X-ray. So just to talk about some of those raw materials that may have stones or glass inherent with just the harvesting of that raw material. So we do see a mixture of electronic devices, but then also filters and strainers as well. So when we think about foreign material, sometimes people just think about electronic devices, but if we think about bringing in raw material, sugar or flour, that's going to pass through a screen just to make sure that any extraneous material could be removed at the intake stage. And that's really important from an integrity point of view, that you know that bringing in a raw material, that if you've done all of your checks on it, you're hoping that the quality of that raw material is not going to change, but things happen. Raw material is brought to your facility in a tanker. There could have been something in the tanker before your raw material. How do you know? So these are all the questions that we expect clients to ask their suppliers. And as a check, to have a filter in place before filling a raw material such as flour or sugar into a silo. And then through, let's just take those two examples. There will be a sifter, a flour sifter or a sugar sifter system
Right.
in place. So throughout the stream, depending on the raw material and also the knowledge of your raw material. So if we take flour as an example, here is another foreign body which could be insects. And we haven't really talked about sort of naturally occurring foreign bodies, but we know that insects live in flour. So it's extremely important to have all of the measures in place that I mentioned before, but also then as you bring into your facility from the silo to have a sifter program and system in place. And typically these sifters are very small screen. We actually talk about a 600 micron screen at AIB International. And we know with that size of screen that it's going to remove even the smallest of insects. It's only a check. It's not a removal system. It is just a check that the flour is actually free from any insect activity. And clients check these sifter screens, and if they find any activity, they act very quickly on going back to find out from the raw material supplier that there's a problem, but more importantly, that none of the insects then enter into the product stream.
So an inspection system, it's more. It's not just the be all end all. It's more than just the mechanical, electrical systems. It's also process driven as well. You can't just rely on installing a sifter and say, okay, we have a sifter, all's well.
No, absolutely not. It's going back to first of all the knowledge of your raw material, and you're working with that knowledge to have the best supply of raw materials, but at the same time you have to think about what might go wrong. So it's a combination of, in the flour sifter example, a physical inspection, and you could look at the sifter and not see anything, but if you're not trained to know what you're looking for, it's very easy to look to miss something that's 600 microns or smaller. So it is a whole set of systems and procedures and inspections that we would see through a food manufacturing facility, and also a combination then of, as I mentioned, electronic devices. Thankfully, these days we don't see clients relying on a metal detector or an X-ray at the end of the line to say, if it gets to this stage, we will find it. Those days, thankfully, are gone. It's all about what's happening upstream. We should always be thinking about prevention. How do we prevent foreign material entering our food? And the examples I've given, if you go back to your raw material supplier and you have very clear specifications on what the levels of acceptable foreign matter, because sometimes you can't remove everything, peanut shells, stalks, but working with very strict raw material procedures will just minimize that risk of something entering your facility. And then the knowledge of knowing that you've got equipment installed within your facility that would deal very quickly with something or identify something very quickly, and also the knowledge of knowing how to inspect it and test it. And testing in particular when we talk around X-rays and metal detectors, because again, this is something that we look very closely at when we are doing our audit inspections, to understand that a client has had the right type of training, the right level of training to understand how their test equipment should be calibrated, and at what sensitivity, and how frequently it should be checked as well.
Well, Jeff, this is actually a great conversation that we're having, but I think we have to cut it short right now due to time. Are you willing to come back and talk some more? Because foreign material controls sounds like it's much larger than we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg right now.
Yeah, sure, Ryan. That's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I'd be more than happy to come back and give you some more of my time.
Perfect. Thanks so much. If any questions, comments, concerns, please reach out to us at foodsafetyfirst@fortresstechnology.com. Again, that's foodsafetyfirst@fortresstechnology.com. Thanks, Jeff. Talk to you next time.
Thanks, Ryan.